Go live to the Ford Performance Center, where top Leafs executives are speaking to reporters a day after coach Sheldon Keefe was fired.
Thanks, Steve. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I haven't been here since my boy was playing for the Humber Valley Sharks about 20 years ago. When he was 8 all the way through 12, I was here at this arena, and it certainly looks a little bit different now. Thank you all for coming this morning. I will not make this a habit of participating in team operation news conferences, but this is different. This is the first time I've spoken publicly at a news conference as the CEO of MLSE. And with that title brings the heavy responsibility of overseeing the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I relish in that opportunity. And at the core of that responsibility is the real reason I came back to Toronto. And that is to win. Good is simply not good enough. I can assure you that is the collective position of ownership. And when I asked during the interview stage what was the definition of success to the owners, one of them immediately said emphatically, just win. It's not easy in a league where rules and regulations promote competitive balance, but where we can, we will provide our hockey operations with every resource to win. I've been here 4 weeks, and I'm still assessing, evaluating, and learning. But I can assure you that no decision will be made, like the decision earlier this week, without a detailed analysis that provides us the best chance to win. We need to win. Nothing else matters. And no doubt you've heard that before, but I am 1,000% committed to it. And with that, I will pass it over to our president of the Toronto Maple Leafs, Brendan Shanahan. Brendan?
Thanks, Keith. First off, I would just like to thank Sheldon Keefe for the 9 seasons that he has given this organization, 5 as head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Sheldon had a difficult job in that, as he had stated, he addresses the players every single day and addresses the media 2 times, sometimes 3 times a day. And I just want to say that in that entire time with us, Sheldon has done it with dignity, with grace, and with professionalism. I'd like to thank his wife, Jackie, his son, Landon, and Wyatt. Sheldon is a great coach, and they don't need me to tell them this, but he's an even better man. So thank you to Sheldon. I also respected the fact that Sheldon took on a lot of the responsibility for the lack of results in the playoffs. I respect that. However, the reality of the situation is the ultimate responsibility is on me. The accountability is on me. Our playoff results have not been good enough. That's on me. The results that we've had in the playoffs, our players know, we know, I know, they're unacceptable. They're unacceptable to our fans, and they're unacceptable to all those that support the Toronto Maple Leafs. We do an analysis at the end of every season. We look at our team and we look forward and we look for ways to be better. And we do that every year. In the past, I believe that there are times where you talk about patience. and I still believe that there are times where patience is the suitable call. However, when you see patterns persist and the results don't change, you have to adjust the way that you think about things. We will look at everything this summer, and we will consider everything this summer, all with the intention of the one thing that we are here for, which is to make the Maple Leafs better and to win. I'll hand it over to Brad.
Thanks, Shani. Just to follow up on Brendan's comments, I think first and foremost, I also want to offer my sincere thank you to Sheldon. Him and I had an opportunity to work together for a year. We went through a very detailed process. I think I said it at the time. I didn't know Sheldon when I came in. And we went through a real detailed, long, sometimes difficult process when I got here. And I believe today, as I did that day, that keeping Sheldon here was the right call. This is a really good coach. This is a really good coach. It's an excellent person. The difficulty of this business is sometimes really good people and people that are good at their job have to be changed. And when I look back at the 11 months I spent with Sheldon the past year, I do consider him an excellent coach. This does not fall at his feet, and by no means do I want it to be taken that by making a change at the head coach position, that all arrows point at Sheldon. But I also couldn't just look at the past year in a vacuum. I'll talk a little bit in terms of the review of the season, but I had to take into consideration the totality of Sheldon's time here. And I felt, and at the end of the day it was my decision, I felt strongly that a new voice was needed. We had gotten to a place where just a new voice was needed. And that's the unfortunate part of this business. I do not believe that you churn coaches and you keep churning coaches. I don't think that is a recipe for success at all. But I just felt at the end of the day, when I looked at the totality of his time here, a change was required. I know Sheldon's not going to be out of work long. This is a really good coach who's going to do a lot of really good things moving forward. So I want to make sure I state that in the opening. I wish him, his family, nothing but the best moving forward. When I quickly look at the season, I think ultimately we didn't, as has been stated earlier, we fell short. We didn't accomplish the goals that we had set for ourselves that I felt were attainable. And some years you look back and you meet expectations, you exceed expectations. To me, we fell short. We left some on the table. And ultimately, that responsibility is mine. I was brought in here. The hockey operations is under my purview, the players, the coaches, the staff. So I take full responsibility of everything that goes on the ice. And I look at our season, I think it was an uneven season to start. We integrated new players. There was I look at our goaltending situation where it was turbulent early on. We went through some injuries on the blue line. And I thought we stabilized going into the new year. Getting into our playoffs, we had some players that missed some time, but I really feel that the ultimate area that we fell short on is a consistent pattern that we've had here. We didn't score enough goals, and special teams we were the second best team in special teams in the series. And those are areas that we tried to look at over the course of the summer, but we will continue to look at. But as Brendan said, when you go through a season as we have, everything must be on the table. Everything needs to be looked at. Everything needs to be considered. I'd like to just close here with a couple of injury updates and injury clarifications. Bobby McMahon and I can't remember the date now, but the home game against Detroit suffered an MCL sprain of his knee. The original diagnosis we thought was going to be about 6 to 7 weeks. He was moving forward. We anticipated that he at some point, if we were to get to the second round, he'd have been available. Austin, at the end of game 2, Austin became real sick. You know, our initial thought was the way he was as sick as he was, that there was maybe a food poisoning of some description. It was a virus that stuck with him. Throughout game 3, he suffered a hit in game 4 where we couldn't rule out, and we don't know if it was a combination of the sickness, the hit, but he was presenting head issues, head injury issues. So we pulled him, and we weren't going to clear him until those things cleared, which they did on the morning or the afternoon of game 7. William, I think, spoke to it during his availability. Prior to the playoff starting, suffered severe migraines. Again, to the point where we had to look at the symptoms as possible, head injury, concussion symptoms. He was cleared of those and returned to play. Connor Dewar is undergoing shoulder surgery today. We anticipate that he'll be back for training camp. And finally, Joel Wool suffered an SI joint sprain, a sprained back at the completion of game 6, which made him unavailable for game 7. So just wanted to clarify and give you some of those updates on injuries.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll pass to questions. Please raise your hand. We'll start with Darren Bird.
First question for Keith. Now, Keith, you mentioned a couple of things. Just win. We need to win. That's the sentiment of ownership. You're not talking about a round or two, right? You're talking about the Stanley Cup. And what is the timeline? Well, I think it's impossible to put a timeline on that. That is undeniably our focus. You know, I've always believed that the formula for success is great skill combined with chemistry and unity. And in the midst of facing adversity in the first series down 3-1, I got a full glimpse of the chemistry and unity that Brad and Brendan have. I cannot comment on what has transpired over the last number of years, but I can tell you that chemistry and unity is the critical components that add with skill in order to be successful, and winning is winning the Stanley Cup. I saw it this year during the 2023 Ryder Cup, where we came in as underdogs, but the bottom line is, under the guidance of Luke Donald, we had chemistry and unity that exceeded that of the Americans, and as a result, we were very successful. And skill, chemistry, and unity is what I believe the recipe for success is. And for me, success is winning the Stanley Cup. Nothing else matters than winning the Stanley Cup.
Josh.
Keith, Coach lost his job with one series victory in 5 years. What's the justification to keep the president with one series victory in 10 years?
I can only comment, like I said, on the first 4 weeks. Brendan Shanahan is the president of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's a champion. He's a 3-time Stanley Cup winner. What I saw in my 4 weeks with the two gentlemen beside me showed me that the chemistry and unity is being built at the highest levels. And I don't have any other comments because I wasn't here other than the last 8 years. I understand the results, but I can only evaluate what I have seen in the first 4 weeks.
Luke Fox. Brendan, when you say that everything is kind of on the table, to paraphrase this summer, safe to assume that includes asking Mitch and John if they'd be willing to waive their no-move clauses? And if so, what's your sense of how receptive they would be to that?
Thanks, Luke. I think it's important to state, as we've discussed even, since the season has ended, that everything is on the table. We will discuss everything. I don't think it serves the Toronto Maple Leafs in any fashion to discuss those things prematurely, to discuss those individuals prematurely. Our focus right now is on finding a new head coach, and certainly that new head coach will have an important voice as part of our decisions going forward. I'm just simply saying that whatever questions you guys ask us here today, generally speaking, are things that we're going to have to consider after the things that we've seen. Brad and Keith are relatively new here, but I am not. And I have seen some of these things over the years. And again, I do believe there's a time for preaching patience, and then I do believe there's a time where you have to examine some of the patterns that persist. So everything will be on the table. Not to get into any specifics today, I don't think that serves the Toronto Maple Leafs well.
Terry Cochet.
Question for Brad. There's a rumor that Craig Berube is at the top of your coaching list. I know a lot's happened this week, but is there any truth to that, and how wide do you cast your net? Do you wait for some other people to possibly come available, and when do you expect to have this done?
Yeah, thanks, Terry. Listen, there's some good coaching candidates out there. We intend to explore them. I'm not going to get into specific individuals. As far as the timeline, Terry, we want to be thorough, but we also understand there's other openings. It was a difficult day yesterday, and I think the process that we went through up until the puck went in the net Saturday night, we're doing, our focus is solely on trying to win that series. And then you go through, you go through all the stages, right? I believe you got to step back. You don't want to make emotional decisions, and it's been emotional. It still is. So I wanted to deal with Sheldon properly and really be clear and think that process through. Spent some quality time with him, and then once that decision was made, get on to the next step. So we began that yesterday. We're not waiting. We're going to be thorough. This isn't something that's going to be hastily done, but we certainly know that there's some quality candidates out there, and we want to get to them as fast as we possibly can.
Nick Zeisberger.
For Brad and or Brendan, while understanding that these players want to win, almost every player we talked to on Monday kept saying, we feel we're close. This is an organization that's won one playoff series in 20 years. What are they close to? Is one series win acceptable? And if so, doesn't the culture have to change a little bit? Doesn't the bar have to be raised?
Well, Mike, what I would say is that they know and understand that those results are not acceptable. But you always want your players to believe. They know that there'll be changes, and they'll know that there are sacrifices that need to be made and that we need to get better. They're talking on Monday, and a couple days earlier they were fighting for their playoff lives. So them having belief in themselves as individuals and as a group is understandable from my perspective. It's our job now, and it's their job to regroup and to better prepare themselves for next year. Brad?
Yeah, the simple answer, Mike, is, and it's not just paying it lip service. No, it's not acceptable, and that's why we have to look at, as we said here today, we've got to dive into this thing, and that's not. I don't believe you throw a body on the tarmac just to say we've done something. And I know it gets played, the comments to the media, and I don't pay a lot of attention to that. I pay a lot of attention to the comments that I have with the players, the meetings that we have with the players. They understand. They understand that we've fallen short, and as Brendan says, there is a time for patience. There is a time in this game that you've got to preach patience. But I think we're at a point when we see this repeatable that we've got to dig into it. And but ultimately, no, the results and sitting here today when we think that we should still be playing isn't acceptable.
Kevin McGrath.
For Brad, in the last 8 years, from Holtby to Rask to Price to Vasilevsky to Bobrovsky and now to Swayman, the Leafs have faced a steady diet of Vezina winners, Jennings winners, Hart winners, nominees, all of those things. What are you going to do about the goaltending so that the Leafs don't always have the second best goalie in any series?
Yeah, it's a good question, Kevin. I think there is when I've gone back now and kind of looked at it, there are some, there's some similar touch points, right? One of them is we haven't scored enough. When I looked at this situation and spent some time over the course of the summer is, we wanted to try to, this team has scored in the regular season, hasn't scored in the playoffs. We increased our scoring in the regular season this year. I think we were the second highest scoring team in the NHL. We were the number one scoring team in the East. We increased, I think, our total goals for by 20 last year, or this year over the previous year. One of the things I wanted to try to do is it wasn't total goals, it's how the goals are scored in the playoffs. You score differently in the playoffs than you do in the regular season. So is it systematic? Is it personnel? I think most of us in this room would understand it's more difficult. You're defended harder. You're played against harder in the playoffs. So we haven't scored enough. Our special teams haven't been good enough. And to your question, we seem to be turning the other team's goalie into the first star every night. So I think it's twofold. We've got to find a way, systematically, personnel-wise, to find a way to score more in the playoffs and score those goals that are scored in the playoffs. And as far as our goaltending, Joe, I've got faith in Joe. Now, like everybody else, there's questions. There's questions that, why the biggest question with Joe is he's gotten injured a lot. We have to dig into that. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes bad luck happens. Is there a training issue that we have to deal with? Do we need to change something in his off-ice routine? All those things is what we have to dig into. I believe in Joe as a goaltender. We have to support Joe. Ilya's contract's up, but we certainly have to try to put ourselves in a position where we don't have the second best goaltender in each of these series. But I think it's a function of both sides, not just our goaltending, but what we do to make things difficult on the other team's goaltender.
Rosie DiManno.
To the Ford Performance Center, where top Leafs executives are speaking to reporters a day after coach Sheldon Keefe was fired.
There's not just one magic point here. I do think one of the things as I look at our team and as we evaluate it over the course of the coming weeks is we've got to find a way to do the hard, unsexy things longer, and those things don't require skill, right? There's some things in these in this sport and in our games, especially this time of year, that are not related to skill, but they help you win. And that's not to say you got to get rid of skill. You need skill. You need talent. You need that to win. But to me, we need a voice that can bring that out.
Steve Simmons.
Question for Brendan. We watch the second round of the playoffs now when we see teams scoring 4 or 5 goals every night, coming back from 4-0 leads, coming back from 4-1 leads. In 8 elimination games for the Maple Leafs, your team has scored 11 goals. That's with the best goal scorer of this generation, with some of the highest paid players in the NHL. How should we believe that you can change this now when you haven't been able to change it for the past 8 years?
Well, that is the challenge, and as Brad said, that is what we wake up every day thinking of the ways in which we can change that narrative and those results. As Brad just alluded to, there are regular season goals and then there are playoff goals. And I'm a firm believer that sometimes playoff goals come from playoff structure and defensive structure and limiting opportunities against, forcing teams to open things up against you. But that is the question that we have to ask ourselves. It's happened too often And I think that we have to, it's a question of coaching, it's a question of messaging, and it's also a question of personnel. We recognize exactly what you just stated, that when the playoffs come, we don't get the goals that we've been getting in the regular season. So how do we change that? You've got to get to the dirty areas to score in the playoffs, and your power play has to be successful to give you that momentum. And unfortunately, aside from the Tampa series in which our power play was good, and we ended up winning that series, in all the other series where especially we've gotten to a Game 7 and we've faced elimination, we haven't gotten those results. So that's something we have to work on.
Mark Masters.
Brendan, to follow up on that, you've expressed a lot of faith in the core guys here over the years. As you look back, as you assess it, why do you think those guys haven't been able to push the group over the top here?
That is the difficult question that we've looked back and had different experiences where if you were to just live in a vacuum and just view this one playoff, you may have a different view of our team and the optimism and the closeness of where they were, but we can't think that way now after seeing what we've seen year after year after year. And that's where I'm saying that I do believe that there's a time where the right answer is patience, and then there comes a time where you have to say that you have new information to you, the information has evolved, and you have to adjust your way of thinking. I know the desire's there. I can tell you that every player who has been here this entire time wants to win in Toronto. Some have had opportunities to work elsewhere and have chosen to come back to Toronto. They're dedicated to getting it done here. So I don't question their dedication, but I do question just our ability as a group to get it done in those difficult times. And that's why we have to make some changes, and we'll continue to look at changes with the goal in mind, what makes the Maple Leafs better, not just in the regular season, but come playoff time.
Brendan, can you, right in the middle, Brendan, can you clarify your contract situation? Is next year the final year on your deal, and do you feel the team needs to have more success next year for you to stay on?
Well, I'm not going to get into the details of my contract and what is correct or not correct. I can say this, that it's not a focus for me. From the day I was hired in the spring of 2014 till today, I wake up every day with the goal of trying to find a way to add and make the Maple Leafs better. My last contract, my first contract with the Maple Leafs, was not addressed or renewed until a month before it expired. It was not a distraction to me then. My contract status will not be a distraction to me or the team now. Beyond that, I'm not going to discuss it.
Greg Ross at the top.
This is a question for, I guess, Brendan and Brett just up here. For the past several years, this team has had 4 players that are high priced that take up about 50% of the salary cap space. Teams that seem to be winning don't seem to be structured that way. Does that philosophy, you talked about having to change the way you think about things, is that one of the things at the top of the list that has to change?
Well, I think, yeah, as we said, the short answer is we have to look at everything. And again, we don't have to revisit history of when those contracts were done and we ran into a pandemic and all the things that happened. We've got, and again, I have to expand the view. I've got a 12-month view of this thing, right? We've got really good players, but it hasn't worked, right? It hasn't worked to date. And again, we're not going to come out here and make emotional decisions and make decisions so that we can have another press conference and look you all in the eyes and said, look at what we've done. That makes no sense. But you have to analyze why it hasn't worked. And certainly, I mean, you can have a viewpoint and say, we've invested in 4 players and you've got X amount of percent of your salary cap tied up there, and if we spread it all around, you're going to have more depth, all these types of things. We are where we are, okay? So this is the situation we are in right now. those are really good players. We've got to dig into why we're ending up with the same result year after year after year, and adjust accordingly.
Lance, Harvey.
Keith, you're from Toronto. You've probably heard so much negative talk about the team. How much does it burn you that this team hasn't had success, and now here you are in a role to change that? How much do you want to be part of that?
Well, I haven't spent much time here in the last 9 years, but in the last 3 to 4 weeks, I've gotten a full glimpse of the power of Leaf Nation. I understand the passion, the commitment of the fans, and it quickly reminded me of going to my very first game in Liverpool, and hearing that song, "You'll Never Walk Alone." The fans here not only deserve but demand a championship, and there's no complacency. We're not here to sell jerseys. We're here to win, and we're going to do everything we possibly can to do that. As much as I love the city, and Toronto is my home, that was not the lure for me to come back. The lure for me to come back was the possibility and the commitment to be successful and to win with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I'm going to do everything in my power and everything with the support of ownership to do just that. As I said, the fans are incredibly passionate. What I saw at Maple Leaf Square was staggering to me in Game 6. The city is certainly different than it was 9 years ago. And one of the ways that it's different is there's even more Leaf fans, and Leaf Nation is even bigger than it was then. And they deserve 100% of our effort to go in and make this team successful, and I believe that's what we're going to do.
Dave Feschuk.
Brendan, you've doubled, tripled, quadrupled down with your faith in this core group. When you look back at that, how do you see it? Is there a level of regret that you showed faith in these guys that can consistently disappoint you, or how do you process that?
I don't have regret for showing faith in people. I wouldn't put it that way, Dave. As Keith alluded to, when we all come to Toronto, we know, especially where the team is at this stage of their development. I mean, there have been times in Leafs history where they're at a different phase, but if you're becoming a part of the Leafs organization now, you know why you're coming here, and you know what you're getting into. And our fans, not just the ones that live here in Toronto and that come to our games and go to Maple Leaf Square and watch our games on TV, but the way that our fans support us on the road, that's an important and it's a very driving and moving thing to us and to our players. It's you don't want to let them down, you want to deliver. And if I felt that the players felt differently than that, in spite of the fact that they haven't delivered, I might feel differently about them as well. So we have to give them all the tools, and we have to make changes where we think changes are going to help our team. But as far as believing in people and having faith in people, you want to help them see things through. And look, I've been in this game a long time, whether it's myself or the players or staff. We know how it works. We've all seen the good and the bad, and we accept the consequences of that might come to any of us. But while you're here, the underlying and the overriding motivation has to be, when you put your head on the pillow at night, is have we made the team better? Have we increased our chances to win the Stanley Cup? And that's what we have to do.
We're going to do three more. Matt Larkin, Gino Reda, and Joe Siegel.
Brendan, this one's for you. The roster that completed this season had one player, Joel Edmondson, who has a Stanley Cup ring. Last year, the team broke through, won a series after adding a Conn Smythe Trophy winner, Ryan O'Reilly, Stanley Cup winner, and Luke Schenn. So I'm wondering for you, how big of a problem is the lack of winning pedigree, and is that something that the franchise will address this offseason?
Well, I think it's important. I think it's not always the most easy thing to attain, but it's certainly when we talk about players or we talk about staff members, when we talk about scouts, when we talk about coaching staff, it's certainly something that we see as an advantage and a benefit. A player like Joel certainly was that. I think that Brad brought in some guys last summer, not necessarily with Stanley Cups rings on their fingers, but he brought an element to the team that we are in alignment with, that had a lot more grit, and Brad, quite frankly, made the demand on the players to play more like a brotherhood and a band of brothers. And I think that they did embrace that. The results haven't changed, but I do think leadership, those qualities. I can tell you from, 100 years ago, my own experience in Detroit, when we won our first Stanley Cup, only Joey Kosher had a Stanley Cup. Steve Yzerman had none. Nick Lidstrom had none. Mike Vernon and Joey Kosher were the only two players that had a Stanley Cup. So would we love to have a whole bunch of guys here that were bringing that? Would that be an attractive quality as we're looking to add in the summertime? Absolutely. But I still think ultimately it's on the players that are here and the ones that come back to dig in. It can't, and know that it can be done. They have to get to an uncomfortable place. As I've said before, they know that, they understand that, and it's up to us to make the changes that we think will put them in the best position to win.
Gino Reda.
Question for Keith. A philosophical thing. You talked about the fact you were away for 9 years. While you were away, the philosophy of this team in terms of how it spent cap money seemed to be spend whatever you need to on the highest skill players, because we can't afford to lose them, up until the point where it's around 50% of the cap, and then spend the rest of the 50% on everybody other than those four, or potentially five, which then you talked about your philosophy of the need to bring in chemistry and unity as well as skill. When you spend that much on so few players, it doesn't seem to leave you a lot of money left over for the chemistry and for the unity of the team. Does your philosophy conflict with the way things have been handled over the last 9 years? And do you see that affecting how you negotiate with anybody who's potentially looking for a new deal in the near future?
Well, the actual makeup of the team is the responsibility of Brendan and Brad. When I talk about chemistry and unity, I talk about it throughout the entire organization, from ownership all the way to the equipment manager. Everybody has to pull on the exact same rope. Everybody has to understand what the objective, what the goal is. There has to be unwavering support for each other. There's no defensiveness. That's what unity is, and that is what a chemistry is to win. Everybody understands it. And it is not the combination of just skill alone. And skill, from my experience, is obviously a critical component of it. But if you don't have the chemistry throughout the entire organization and the unity, and like I said, starting from ownership all the way through to the equipment manager, then it's more difficult to be successful. And that's the support that I'm going to provide. Brendan and Brad have shown that chemistry. Brendan and Brad knows what they have to do this summer, and they're the experts at it. And what I'm going to be is a support for them to hopefully drive the importance of a chemistry and a unity through the entire organization.
I'd like to add to that and hand it over to Brad, because in fairness, Gino, that is something that Brad talked about when he came here, and the importance of the rest of the team and the players and the roles. So I'd like for Brad to talk about that, because that's something that certainly when he came was something that he recognized as well.
Yeah, two things, Gino. I think, and again, understanding how it's played out. I don't ever think and I'm not going to speak to it. It's not. I wasn't here then, but I don't ever think the philosophy was we're going to spend half of our money on a small number of players. Things happen, and salary caps didn't grow as we all projected, but we are where we are. Taking out salaries, taking out all the other stuff. I think it might have been you and I in an interview when I first came. I know there's talk of, the core four and all these names that we talk. We don't talk about that internally. But what we have to do is everybody is important. Everybody has to feel important. And I think what we've had in this roster is we've had, the idea that things have never changed here. I would disagree with. There's been a lot of change, and there's been a lot of change around those core players, obviously. But we have to, and this isn't the players' feelings, but we have to make sure everybody feels important here. This is not, can't go on the backs of 4 individuals, 3 individuals, 2 individuals. This is about the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's not about 1, 2, or 3 people. And salary aside, that was one of the things I really wanted to try to change coming here, is everybody's important. To win here, everybody, winning teams have the unique ability for everybody to feel if they weren't part of it, they wouldn't accomplish their goal, regardless of minutes played, dollars that they earn. Everybody's important. And that is what is going to happen here. Forget about what you're on the 1st and the 15th, what you're cashing. We are not going to have success here, whether the guy at the top of the food chain or number 23 on the list is important, and they are.
Last question, Joe Siegel.
Here. Brendan, do you still believe this core group can win? And if so, why?
Sorry, say the last part again.
Do you still believe this core group can win? And if so, why?
Well, that gets back to the essence of the opening statement. I think that when there's a time, again, not to repeat myself, but there's a time where you look at the age and the development of players and you talk about patience. And then there comes a time where you see certain patterns and trends repeat themselves, results repeat themselves. And that's what we have to do this summer. Without getting specific, I've said earlier, it's not our intention here today to single any one individual out or any one small group of this team out. We're talking about the whole team. But what we are saying is that it has certainly become evident that we have to assess all of those things and assess whether or not we have to make some very difficult decisions this summer to make the team better. Do you want to follow up?
Yeah, just
yes.
Why now and why not last summer or 2 summers?
It was every summer. It was every summer. Like I said to you, it's not that you don't make those assessments at the end of every season, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5, you make all of those assessments. You take the information that you have at the time and the information that's been brought to you at that time. And what I'm saying to you is over time, that information, and when you see patterns not change, when you change things around some of your core issues, hoping that this year the results will be different, and they don't. That's when you start having to reassess from a different lens. More information comes to you, different information comes to you. Certain things that you maybe felt in the past start to shift as you get that new information. So it's not that these assessments aren't made in the past, it's that you have to constantly be growing with your information and willing to adapt with your information. And at the end of the day, it's just saying when we come back here next year, And it might not look it on the first day of camp. It might be in the trade deadline. It might be, but when we're walking into next year's playoffs, knowing that we first have to make the playoffs, but when we're walking in next year to the playoffs, that we're a team that we feel more confident that can get different results.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Have a good day.